Good evening, everyone, or afternoon or night, maybe, depending on where you're tuning in from. My name is Isabel Molina, and I am the public programs producer here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's book talk for Life Must Go On as part of our Stories Survive series. Here at the museum, we are dedicated to the crucial mission of educating our diverse community about Jewish life and heritage before, during, and after the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti Semitism, stories of resistance against injustice, and more. Thank you again for joining us today virtually. We hope that if you're able, you will visit the museum in person to see our current exhibitions, including Courage to Act, Rescue in Denmark, the museum's first exhibition for visitors ages 9 and up. As I mentioned, closed captions are available on today's program, and instructions on how to turn those on or off are posted in the chat. If you have questions for our speakers during the program, please put them in the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the hour. Again, that's the Zoom Q&A box and not the chat. Today, we are honored to be joined by B. Lurie and Dr. Stephen Leonard Jacobs. B. Lurie is the daughter of two child Holocaust survivors, her father Sol and her mother Evelyn Rebecca Lurie, whose parents escaped from Poland with two toddlers. B learned by her parents' actions the importance of helping those in need and devoted her career to making a difference in the lives of others as a leader of nonprofit organizations and government agencies, and as an owner of two businesses. B is also an active volunteer in her community and at her local synagogue. Dr. Stephen Jacobs is the child of a Holocaust survivor. He is a noted Holocaust and genocide scholar and the author of nearly 40 books. He is a professor in the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Alabama and Emeritus Aaron Arnov Chair of Judaic Studies. You can purchase Life Must Go On at the link in the chat, which I highly encourage everyone to do. Thank you again for joining us, and now I'll hand things over to B and Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel, for your introduction, and to the museum for inviting us to share a somewhat unusual approach to memoir accounts of survivors. Now, in the interest of transparency and fairness, B and I agreed that we should share with you the backstory that led to our collaboration. And it began with a mutual good friend who unfortunately is no longer with us, Sylvia Vigoda, who was the chair of the Georgia Holocaust Commission, and called me up out of the blue and said, I've moved home to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and have befriended B. Lurie and have learned of her father's story, and his story needs to be told, and you are the person to write it. And I said, whoa, that was quite a surprise. And the reason that I was so surprised, if you were to read the introduction to our book, you would learn two things that about me and Holocaust survivor memoirs. I have professionally, academically shied away from such work because, one, I believe all of those stories need to be preserved in print, audio, film, whatever, but I have always been reluctant to be the one to read a manuscript recommended for publication and perhaps even respond to such writing that would need to be improved. So I have really not made the focus of my work memoirs of survivors, including my own late father. But what I discovered is that I did recommend for publication 30 years ago a book by the late Harry Gordon called The Shadow of Death, the Holocaust in Lithuania. So it seems that I too have come full circle in a commitment to getting these stories in print. The other thing that I want to share with our audience is my own bias. This is not a normal memoir. My academic concern has always been that there is no historical context for too many of the published stories, and people who read them don't see or have a sense of the larger context in which these events happen. And I would say to our audience that that's the case in every country that was overrun by the Nazis between 1939 and 1945. There are, yes, amazing survivor stories, and they need to be told and shared. But what about what happened? Where did it happen? Why did it happen? What were those nation states all about? What were those communities all about? So those are the 2 points that I think will launch our conversation. And my co-author and I have agreed that I will provide a bit of context, and then you will hear from Bea her father's story, which is incredible and important. But I'm not going to tip her hand until she begins sharing his story. Now, I don't know how much our listeners, hearers, audience know about the fate of Lithuanian Jewry. It is estimated that approximately 95% of the Jews of Lithuania perished during those horrific years. Now, parenthesis, I will tell you that I consistently in my own writing do not use the word killed or died. I make it a point when I write about events relating to the Holocaust and or historical and contemporary genocides, I always use the word murder, because it is, one, a dramatic word, and it is an important word with everything that that word implies. 96% of Lithuania's Jews, a viable Jewish community in the nation, were murdered during those years. Now, what is even more upsetting, more horrific, is that the bulk of those murders took place not during the entirety of the Holocaust, September 1939 to May 1945, but rather in the 3 years plus 1941 to 1944. So we're really looking at almost half of the period of the event that produced these horrors, and they were horrors nonetheless. Now, in the book itself, we decided that the following would be our organizational understanding for our readers. We began with a discussion of the history of Lithuanian Jewry from the Middle Ages unto the end of World War I. We know that the earliest Jewish communities of Lithuania were already established and viable during the 5th century. So we're talking a historical Jewish community of prominence. We then decided that it's not only the entirety of the community, but the specific environment where Sol Lurie was born raised, experienced, and fled. And that was the city of Kaunas in Lithuanian, or Kovno in Yiddish, and was one of the two major cities of Jewish prominence. The other, I'm sure many in our audience are familiar, and that was Vilna. Vilna was the heart of the Jewish community of Lithuania. Its most prominent resident was a rabbi by the name of Elijah Gaon, who, if you look him up, you will be astounded at his productivity. But his home city, Vilnius, was known as the Jerusalem of Lithuania. That's because of its religious prominence. So we started to tell the story of such a prominent Jewish community. 5th century to the First World War, the city of Kovno, before, during, and after the Shoah, the Holocaust, the interaction of Jews and non-Jews. And then as we launched into Sol's story and his journeys, and we have to use the word journeys in the plural, we also wanted to reacquaint, remind our readers of the places that Sol experienced and lived through. And it's not only the ghetto, the large ghetto of Kovno, the smaller ghetto of Kovno, but it's those places that are well known to our audience as well. Stutthof concentration camp, Landsberg am Lech, which unfortunately you may know is the place of the prison where Adolf Hitler, Yimach Shemo v'Zikro, may his name be forever blotted out, was briefly imprisoned and wrote his political testament, the Konzentrationslager Kaufering. Then we wanted to talk also about Auschwitz, Birkenau, and Buchenwald. So what you would learn, we hope, in our telling of Sol's story was not only Sol's story, but the story of the Lithuanian Jewish community as well. Sol's story is uniquely his own, as was my late father's, was all Shoah survivors. We now believe that worldwide only about 250,000 survivors are still alive today. And we also know with sadness that we will reach that moment in time when there will no longer be a living survivor of the Shoah with whom we can interact and learn from them. So books such as this, the holographic project that takes place in California, the Fortunoff Video Archives at Yale, all of this becomes treasured resources for educators, for families, for scholars, for interested people, for children of survivors, second generation. My children are the third generation. Our grandchildren are the fourth generation. So that essentially was my approach to the book. And then I had the last thing that I'm going to say. When Bea and I connected, I learned that she, or you, also wanted to write your father's story. But like many of us who are childhood survivors, that's a difficult thing to do. So this is truly a collaborative effort. And as we told the story of the larger context, if you have a copy or see a copy or look at the table of contents, you will see we did something very unusual in a memoir of a survivor. We embedded Sol's memories into the various chapters as we told his journey and again this larger context. So I hope that what I have shared with you by way of introduction to Sol and B makes sense. And I will say that the last point, we also thought it was important before we ended the book to talk in general about what we called the fate of the survivors and coming to America. I mean, I think we fail to appreciate lives almost destroyed and lives rebuilt, and the incredible resilience that it took for those who experienced such horror to rebuild their lives. And I, for one, am fully appreciate it. And I will end with my late father's comment to me on more than one occasion. He would look at me and say, I am the bridge to the victory over Hitler and the Nazis. You are the victory. So those of us who are their children, their grandchildren, their great-children, we are the victory. They are the bridge to the victory. And with that, I want to turn it over to B to tell you an incredible story.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Isabel. And thank you to the museum for giving us the opportunity to talk about this really important book. I'm so grateful to Steve for taking this risk and going outside of his normal way of doing things. It's been quite the journey for both of us. And my father wanted me to write this book, which is why I started writing it. My father, Sol Lurie, was born in Kovno, Lithuania, and he was born in 1930. He had this really incredibly carefree life. They ice skated, they skied, they did water sports. I mean, they did horseback riding. He just really loved his life. And he had no idea that it was about to change. So he was 6 years old when he started going to, actually 8 years old, he started going to cheder at the yeshiva, and didn't get an education beyond 5th grade. He survived 6 concentration camps from the ages, and a Kovno Ghetto, from the ages of 11 to 15. And if you think about it, if you think back to when you were 11 years old, what it would be like to go through that, it's like unimaginable. You know, you go from this incredibly wonderful life to all of a sudden you're living in hell. And every minute of every day, as my father said, you don't know if you're going to make it or not. So you're always trying to figure out how to survive. And he decided right from the beginning, when they went into the Kovno Ghetto, that he was going to outlive Hitler. And that was his motivation every single minute of every single day for those 4 years. Thank goodness he had that motivation, but he also had luck. He had the kindness of strangers, including some Germans who saved his and his family's life. He had his grandfather who died, his beloved grandfather, Label, who died the day before the Nazis invaded. Label was, I mean, my father was like his shadow. He was always with him. And he really feels that Label, his grandfather, was his guardian angel, you know, and just guiding him in terms of, you know, how to survive. So he had a superhuman resilience And he just had a lot of moxie. And the combination of all those things, but mostly luck, um, led him to be able to survive. His family was very upper middle class. They owned a lumber mill, and they had 80 horses and 50 employees. And it was a family business with his grandfather and his father and their brothers. They were incredibly successful. And, one day everything changed. The Nazis broke their pact with the Soviets and they invaded Lithuania. And so my father's family realized very, very quickly that if they didn't get out, they wouldn't survive. So my father's immediate family, and he had more than 100 relatives in the immediate area that lived together. And some of the aunts and uncles got all their stuff together. They grabbed, their wagons. My father grabbed, the family grabbed their horses, two of their horses, and they took off. And they decided that they were going to go farther into the Soviet Union where they were hoping they would be safer. And on the road, they were walking and running. The Nazis were strafing the road. And every time they heard the planes coming closer, they would just all jump into a ditch. And there were people who were killed, not from his family, luckily, our family, but others were killed, others were injured. The Nazis were bombing while they were on this road. And after about 20 miles, they were exhausted and they stopped into this town. And they, they tied up their horses and they found a place to sleep. And the next morning they woke up and they found that the Nazis had surrounded the town. The Nazis they ordered everybody to go into the synagogue, and they locked the synagogue so nobody could get out. And they were there for 3 days, just not knowing what their fate was going to be. After 3 days, the Nazis ordered all those Jews who were not from that town to leave and go back to where they came from. And as my father and his family and the others were leaving, the Lithuanians surrounded the synagogue and set the synagogue on fire with everybody in it. So the 300 people who were in the synagogue all perished from that town. My father and his family went to go get their horses, and their horses weren't there. They'd been stolen. So my father's family, one on each side, they grabbed the wagon and acted like the horses to move the wagon. And as they're on the road, this German soldier, Nazi, said to them, why are you doing that? Like, where are your horses? And they said that the horses had been stolen. And they said, where are you going? And I said, well, we were ordered to go back to the town. So he said to them, you stay right here and I will be back. And so they waited for 20 minutes, and the soldier came back with 2 horses. And he said, you take these horses and you go back, but don't go back on the road that you're on, because the Lithuanians are on this road and they are murdering, they're stealing the belongings of the Jews and they're murdering them. You go back on this other road where the Nazis are, and you'll be okay. And they had to make like a life or death decision, which road do we go on? They decided to listen to the soldier, and they got back safely to Kovno. But when they came back, their beautiful home had been, Lithuanians had moved into their home and taken over their property. And the same thing happened to the other family members who were with them. So they had no place to go, so they moved into the stables. All the horses had been stolen. Everything that was in the stables were stolen, but that's where they decided they had to live. And things were getting worse for the Jews. And then the Nazis made an announcement that all the Jews had to move into the Kovno Ghetto, which was being developed in an area in Slobodka, which is where some family lived. It was kind of the poorer part of the town, but So my father's family and their family, moved into the Kovno Ghetto, and the Nazis sealed the ghetto with, barbed wire and guards, and they had no way to get out of there. My father spent every single day trying to figure out how to survive, because during the day, his family had their slave labor assignments, and the Nazis were always looking for kids because they had no use for the children. So my father said that he was like a rat. He would like hide inside walls. He would hide any place you can figure out just so he wouldn't get caught. And just thinking about the stress of having to figure out all the time how to save your life. One day, his grandfather and brothers, who their job was to work in the stables, heard that the Nazis were having another action, and they were gathering the children again. So they grabbed my father and his cousin, who had a 9-month-old baby, and they had a space inside the stables where they stored food to keep it cool in the summer months. So they put my father and cousin and the baby inside that storage area, and they took a board and put it on top of it, leaving a little bit of a space for them to breathe. And they put wheat and some hay on top of that. And the Nazis came into the stable at just the moment that our cousin was moving the board a little bit more because she had asthma and she couldn't breathe. And so the wheat and the hay were seeping in, and they ran over there and they pulled the board, off, and they yelled, "Jews, get out." So the baby started screaming, and my father realized that if he didn't get out of there, he wouldn't survive. One of the Nazis grabbed our cousin, the 9-month-old, and put the baby on the bayonet and twirled the baby around and killed this poor baby. My father saw this and he leaped out of the hole, and he went to the back part of the stables, and there was a place where he could, where feed was stored. And so he went into that spot, and there was a compartment in there, and he pushed himself in there and, covered the top of it off. And the Nazis were looking for him, and they were using their bayonets, in the hay and in the wheat, trying to find him. And my father's older brother, Mende, was watching this. And as the Nazis were getting closer, he yelled in Yiddish to my father, "You got to get out now." So my father comes jumping out. He's 11 years old, 12 years old. And he knows that they're 20 feet away. There's a way to get out of the stables. And as he's running, the Nazis are shooting at him. And luckily they didn't get him. He gets through the door, he jumps over a fence, and he goes into the outhouse. And he gets into the waist, and when he hears the Germans about to open the door, he submerges himself fully. And then, they didn't see him, they went out, he came out of the waist, he took his head up, and he just stayed there, for the rest of the day until it was dark enough that he felt that he had a better chance of getting home. Meanwhile, his mother, believed that he was dead because the brothers had seen what had happened and they couldn't imagine that he survived. And she was crying so much that her eyes were bright red. And my father walks in filled with, waste from head to toe. And she sees him and she races over to him and she hugs and kisses him and is just like so thrilled that her youngest son had survived. And when my father talks to school kids, he tells them about the love of a mother. He uses this as an example, as a way for them to understand how important your parents are. And for those kids that have good parents, he just wants them to know that you need to really respect your parents and love your parents. And he says to them, you go home today and you hug and you kiss your mother and father and you tell them how much you love them. And you do this every day. And he has over 10,000 letters from school kids and others, adults, principals, telling him about the impact his story had on them. And in some of the letters, the kids talk about, they come in from school, they do what my dad said. And, one mother, said, did you get in trouble in school today? What's going on? But most of them were very grateful that their kids had started doing this. And these are middle school kids and high school kids. So it's really special for the parents. There are many stories of my dad's survival and how he just cheated fate so many times. In the Kovno Ghetto, which became a concentration camp. But when the Allies were getting closer, they liquidated the camp, and then they moved them in open cattle cars to Stuttgart. And my dad was, he was shorter for his age, and they had put the children and the women together on one side and the men on the other. And my grandfather just knew that he had more of a chance of surviving if he was with the men. So when the Nazis weren't looking, he grabbed my father and hid him among the men. And they were, they moved from, camp to camp. The Nazis would move them around. At one of the camps, my father, his brothers and his fathers were, at slave labor work, and the Nazis came and they grabbed all the kids, and there were 31 boys from Kovno, and they grabbed them and they put them on a train, and actually, on a train going to Birkenau, which is part of the Auschwitz complex. Two of the boys broke through the floorboards and no one knows what happened to them. So there were 29 boys from Kovno who arrived, and my father they all knew at this point that this is what was, the minute you came out of the train, you knew that they were exterminating Jews. You couldn't miss that smell. And they knew before that. So they just happened to come at a time when there was a 48 hours of, the Nazis had agreed to stop exterminating Jews in Birkenau if they were given coffee, sugar, and trucks. And it was at that point during that period that my father had arrived. It was like 3 hours after that started. And they were all sent to the gas chambers. And, they locked the gas chambers. It's pitch black in there. And they all figured that was the end of their lives. But instead of gas, water came out. And they survived. At least at that point in time. Most of the other Kovno boys were killed eventually in Birkenau. But my father just had so many things happen to him. There's just one story where he was sent to Dr. Mengele, and Dr. Mengele had the boys line up, and he chose the ones that he thought he would experiment on, and my father happened to be one of those. And so he was, in the bunks there, and the Germans were running out of people they were killing so many that they didn't have enough laborers to work in the field. So my father was in was in the bunks there, and the next day they came in looking for more laborers, and my father the night before says that his grandfather told him to put straw in his shoes so that he would look taller. So he had grabbed straw from the beds, put it in his shoes, and when they came, they picked him. And so he survived for another day to do, really brutal slave labor. Throughout his experiences, there were people who took pity on the kids and, shared food with them, even though the amount that they had was very little, but they were prisoners of war and they could shared some of the better rations that they got. They were just real angels who just helped them. And after he was in Birkenau and Auschwitz, they put them on a death march. And my father was outside in Poland in January, and Poland is so cold. I've been there in January. And all he had was what he called his striped pajamas and clogs, and that was it. Nothing else. No coat, no hat, no food, and there was a lot of snow on the ground. And so what they would do and hope that they didn't get caught is like bend down and pick up snow and use that as water. He got to Buchenwald and was liberated on April 11th, 1945, which is his birthday. So he celebrates 2 birthdays every year. He ended up, they didn't know what to do with the kids at Buchenwald, and they finally got agreements from the Ose, which is a Jewish orphanage, to take the kids in different places that they had their orphanages. So he went to the orphanage in Normandy and was there for 2 years. It wasn't until the first year that he was there that he found out that his father and his brothers, which is incredibly rare, survived. And they were behind the Iron Curtain in Kovno because of the Soviet Union or Russia at the time, I guess. And so he decided at the age of 16, I just can't even imagine making this decision, but he made a lot of decisions I can't imagine making. He made the decision that he was not going to go back to Kovno because he didn't want to live that kind of life. He wanted freedom. He didn't want to live where there was, repression, where there was anti-Semitism. He wanted to go to America. And a family member had found him who lived in America, and she arranged for him to go to the US, and he moved in with uncle and aunt in East New York and Brooklyn, and he learned Yiddish. He learned English by watching movies and also just from piece of the street kids. That's how he learned. And he did what his family had always done. He worked really, really, really hard, and he worked for different factories. If he didn't feel he was getting paid enough in one place, he went to another place, and he just really wanted to make a good life in America. He met my mother, who was also a survivor, and they got married. They met on a blind date. They got married. They stayed in Brooklyn just about their whole lives. And as a kid growing up with Holocaust survivors, it was tough. It was really hard because no one knew what PTSD was. The survivors were told, no one wants to hear about it, just go on with your life. And my parents didn't talk about it. And my father would wake up with these horrible nightmares, just screaming. And I would go in and ask my mother, what's wrong? Is Dad okay? And she'd say, nothing's wrong, just go back to bed. And as a 7, 8-year-old kid, it's like something's obviously wrong. It's really scary. So we just didn't know what had happened to my father or my mother. The only thing that I knew is my mother would tell us when she was angry at us for not eating our vegetables, that she would say that you don't know how lucky you are, you're being ungrateful, because when we were in Siberia, so they had escaped from Poland the day before the Nazis arrived in Poland, and they ended up in Siberia, faced starvation, anti-Semitism. She said all we had to eat was sewer water and potato peels, and occasionally a little piece of bread, which my grandfather would have to wait all day online for. That's all I knew. And it wasn't until I started at the age of 10 or 11 going to the library, I discovered the Holocaust section in the library, and I started reading. And it was terrifying. It's like I had no one to talk to about it. I had no way to process this information, but it helped me begin to see some of what might have happened to my father. So my father didn't talk to me about it, his experience, until I was 44 years old. And, since then he has, well, it took a while, it took 11 years after he said that he wanted to start talking about it, to start talking to school kids. And once he started doing that and getting these letters about the impact he was having, it gave him this whole new lease on life. And he was always inspirational, but he became so inspirational in how he took what happened to him to help others learn lessons that would help them become better people, and be kind to others, and fight back against anti-Semitism. And he just kept on growing as a person the more that he talked to the kids, and he began to express himself and show emotion, and started telling me for the first time in my life that he loved me and he would hug me. My father never hugged me as a kid. So I've I found the father that I didn't know was there, through his discovery of the emotions that he had buried. And he's now 95 years old, and he is absolutely my hero. And I just feel so blessed that he's my dad, and that other people can learn from what he went through and the important lessons, especially for today, what's happening in our country. And this book will inspire you to really want to make a difference. So I want to just, thank you all for listening to the story. This is only a small part of what the book is about, but I wanted to give you an overview about my dad.
Well, thank you, Bea and Stephen, for such a thoughtful presentation and taking us really through both your father's story and also how you chose to write and organize the book. Was very interesting. We have now about 15 minutes left for audience questions. We have some questions already that have come in from the audience, but of course, as I'm speaking and posing the questions, if our audience members have more questions, feel free to send them in. And apologies in advance if I don't get to everyone's. I'll also try to combine some questions if they're similar, just so that we can get to as many as possible. I'll start with a question really for the two of you. We have some readers, or some listeners, excuse me, who are wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what the process was like collaborating on this book and really undertaking this as a joint effort between you both.
Collaborative writing for me is always a very difficult process. I think it began for us with me kind of laying out how I envisioned the text and this idea. In the introduction, I made a comment that what has always bothered me, uh, too many memoir accounts by too many survivors gathering dust on too many bookshelves. They're written, they're published, God willing, they're selling, and that's the last we hear of them. So that's what I said, at least initially, to be, as I learned that she so much wanted to tell this story. So I suggested early on, let me outline my idea, and I will go ahead and write the historical contexts of your father's story. And then your job, since you know him better than I, will be to plug the stories into the chapters. So the chapters become both history and reality. Here is what we understand to be the context of the Kovno Ghetto, where Sol was. But wait a minute, that's not humanizing the ghetto. That's me, the teacher, the scholar, the professor, telling you about the place. But let's learn from somebody who was there. I mean, I was not there. So I think that's how we developed. And lo and behold, I think maybe to both of our surprises, it worked. It worked.
It worked. And the reviews, I mean, point to this, you know, how unique this is and how powerful it is to do it this way. And that how it adds to the canon of Holocaust literature. So it worked incredibly well. And for me, I mean, Steve is used to publishing, writing a lot of books very quickly. And this was such an emotionally difficult story for me to write that I kept on thinking, like, I need to find a time when I want to be depressed to write some of these parts that are really tough. And remarkably, I couldn't find a time when I wanted to do that. So he's being really patient, and I'm you know, going at a snail's pace, and my father's asking me what's the status of the book. And I'm doing the best job at procrastinating you've ever seen. But you know, because I didn't want to let Steve down, I didn't want to let my dad down, I just kept on persisting. And I took a 4-month period, and I just finally sat down and said, I'm going to finish this. And I did. And it was just this huge relief that I had survived, literally survived dealing with all of those emotions from having parents who were Holocaust survivors and what that was like growing up, and also dealing with the horrors that my father went through. So the story about the baby, I mean, it took every ounce of my being the first time that I told that story, which is pretty recently. Like, I just couldn't, it was just, how do you imagine that there's somebody in the world who is cruel enough to do that? And they were laughing, the Nazis. So it's been a journey. It still is a journey.
Thank you both for sharing. And B, you kind of touched on this a bit in your response about how people have reacted to the book. One of our audience members is also wondering, in particular, how your family has responded to it and getting to see your father's story in print in a book, how that's made them feel.
So my sister and my father are really excited. I didn't think about the other family members, like they would also be reading it. And I get, you know, I've gotten feedback. Oh, I finished the book. Oh my gosh, you know, this is our family history. It's in this book. I can't believe it, you know, and it's been so powerful. Even one of my cousins in Israel, who I didn't know existed until I did research on the book, she sent me a text recently, and her English is not very good, that she
Mhm.
wants to be able to buy the book in Israel. Where can she get it? So it's amazing. My cousin, my father's brother's daughter, who I've become close with, she's really wants to just dive into it, and wow, it's there's a lot of stories around this, but I'm just giving you like the
Mhm.
touch of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's nice to hear it was received so well by your family and that they're looking for it in other countries as well.
Mhm.
Um, we have another audience member um, who mentions how, you spoke about how your father growing up well into your adulthood didn't speak much about his time during the war. And they're wondering how much of the story that is in this book did you know at all beforehand, or how much did you learn really when you started the process of writing the book?
I don't know if I can totally answer that question
Hmm.
because I don't remember. I mean, I know I wrote the book for 13 years. I
Right.
didn't writing it for 13. I was
Hmm.
procrastinating a lot of those years, but um, I didn't know his story until I was 44.
Hmm.
So, and thank goodness I took, a few years later, it was like, I need to like sit down with my father again and take really good notes because I don't want to forget anything that he said. And thank goodness I did that because my father developed dementia and Alzheimer's. He's got vascular dementia and it's advanced now, and he's got advanced Alzheimer's. And if I hadn't done that, those memories would have died with him. So it's, you write down, I tell people all the time, video your family stories, write them down. You just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Thank you. We have another question that is sort of for the two of you, so I'll pose it to you both. But a couple readers or listeners are wondering if either of you have any advice for any of our viewers who might be interested in writing their own family's Holocaust stories, or in some way, creating something more permanent from their family's memories.
I'll, Steve, you should start
Go
because
ahead. No,
you've
you
written
go
so much.
first.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yes, get the stories down. Uh, I think publication is the second stage. The
Mhm.
stories need to be preserved. So if among our audience there are people who want to write those stories, yes, please do that. Touch base with the uh, Holocaust Museum in Washington as a repository, other museums, if some of the audience are closer to other places. We need to preserve those stories. Now, as a researcher, I'm also concerned if you have family documents. One of the things that Bee didn't mention in the book, there are two sections of family photographs.
Mhm.
So this book is also a tribute. I have very little of that kind of material
Mhm.
personally. So if among our audience are people with photographs, documents, certificates, those need to be included in the production of
Yeah.
the account.
Yeah, I would also say that one of the things that was really surprising to me is that it wasn't just my father's story. I talked to some of the other family members, and everybody had different information that helped piece things together. Um,
Mhm.
and there were a lot of aha moments that just didn't make sense to me because, when you're a kid and you're visiting all these people, like you don't
Mhm.
really know who they are. But when you're
Mhm.
talking to people, as they're adults and on in the years, I mean, they have so much information that's really important. And, they get older and they you want to make sure that you have that information because once that person's gone, My mother refused to tell her story, so none of us know her story.
Mm.
I mean, that's terrifying. And she died at 57.
Well, thank you both for sharing that advice. We have just a couple minutes left, so I think time for one last question. We can end with you, B. We have a question. I know you both touched on the sort of unique format and nature of this particular book. But some people are wondering if when you were starting the process of writing this book, if you were inspired or influenced by any other Holocaust memoirs or biographies. And really either both or either of you can take this one.
I can just tell you that I have a humongous collection of Holocaust memoirs and
Mm.
biographies, and I have not been able to read a single one. I just collect them so that people will know that this happened.
Mhm.
It's just so painful for me. So
I can't give you a specific memoir, but my good colleague who wrote the afterword for our book, David
Mm.
Patterson, University of Texas at Dallas, actually wrote a book on the importance of memoirs
Mm.
for us who want to know more about what happened. That book was part of my own inspiration. Uh, Over the years, I have read, and like be perhaps not as large, that's not a focus of my work, uh,
Mhm.
memoirs, but I have interacted with enough Holocaust survivors
Mhm.
to listen, to learn how to listen to their stories. And I think that's part of the driving emphasis for me. Just it becomes inspiring when you realize they went through that. Here they are here.
Mhm.
Wow.
yeah.
Tell me your story. Tell me your story. And I have yet, I have never met either a Holocaust survivor or a genocide survivor, since I work in that area also,
Mhm.
with who has been reluctant to share.
Mm.
I spent a week with the Kurds, for example, in northern Iraq after
Mhm.
Saddam Hussein was deposed, in a village that was gas attacked,
Mm.
sitting in the living room of a family telling me their story. I've been, so it becomes inspiring it, without necessarily reading a particular account, just
Mhm.
interacting with such people.
So, thank you. Yes, we definitely owe a great deal of gratitude to all those who are willing to share their stories with us. We are just at the hour. I want to really thank you both so much for coming on and sharing both your approach to this book and also be sharing your father's story and your family's story with all of us. I, of course, want to thank our audience as well.